You're listening to Real Life, No Filter, where raw emotions and real moments take center stage. No masks, no filters. Just honest stories about life, love, and everything in between. Get comfortable. We're about to begin. At the edge of a vast field, where the tall grass swayed softly under gentle gusts of wind, stood young Sarah. The heavenly blue above her head shone with a clear, unfading sunlight. The girl's gaze was fixed on the horizon line. There, barely noticeable, a tiny dot appeared, which grew larger with each second, taking on the outline of a human figure. Sarah knew who she was waiting for, and her very presence here was for the sake of this meeting. The dot grew, and now before her appeared a girl running towards her. A smile touched Sarah's lips. It was her, with long, light brown hair, mischievous brown eyes, a scattering of freckles on a slightly upturned nose, thin, graceful arms and legs. The girl remarkably resembled Sarah, as if she were her mirror image. Beside her, Sarah felt an extraordinary sense of happiness and tranquility. They never exchanged words, only smiles, touches of hands, silent laughter. Sometimes they ran somewhere together, sometimes they just sat on a large stone, watching the world around them. At times their path lay along the winding trails of the surroundings. Sarah clearly understood that these meetings took place in the world of dreams. The girl appeared often, especially in early childhood, but not daily. Sometimes once a month, sometimes several times a week. Sarah always eagerly anticipated these dreams. They were different from ordinary ones. They were incredibly realistic, full of life, and, unlike other dreams, never faded from memory after waking up. Sarah couldn't recall their first meeting. It seemed the dream friend had always been with her. At first, both were tiny tots. They grew and changed in sync, simultaneously. Now they were 14. No longer children, but not yet adults. Tall, thin, slightly awkward teenagers. Unfortunately, these wonderful dreams were abruptly cut short. And just now, a sharp sound tore Sarah from the world of dreams. She found herself in her bed. Beside her sat the cat, Jasper. Clumsily jumping onto the nightstand, he knocked over a glass of pencils. It was this clatter that caused her to wake up. Well, now I don't know when I'll see my friend again. Today? Definitely not. Sarah gently stroked the cat. He immediately started purring like a little tractor and settled comfortably on the nightstand, as if taking up the watch of a night guard. The girl smiled and turned onto her other side. She needed to fall asleep quickly, as she had to get up early tomorrow. The holidays had come to an end. Sarah lay there for a while longer, thinking about her extraordinary dreams. Before, she thought everyone had friends like that, who came in dreams for years. This girl, whose name remained a mystery, had long become an integral part of her life, something completely natural and habitual. But growing up, Sarah realized that her friends had amazing, sometimes completely illogical dreams, where the characters constantly changed. No one else had such a long-term dream friend as she did. "Oh, you're just making it all up. Simply lying," sneered the spiteful Chloe. The other girls were silent, but it seemed they didn't believe Sarah either. Since then, the girl told no one about her dreams, not even her parents. She concluded for herself. Friends don't come to other people in dreams. What was happening to her was rare and apparently difficult for others to believe. Her parents. At the thought of them, Sarah smiled. In this, she was incredibly lucky. She grew up in an atmosphere of boundless love and acceptance. Sarah's mother and father were older than her peers' parents. Later, the girl realized that she was a late, very long-awaited child, therefore immensely loved, perhaps even a little spoiled, to be completely honest. There was always plenty in their family, and Sarah had almost everything she hinted at from a very young age: expensive toys, beautiful clothes, trips to theatres and concerts, travel. When it was time to go to grammar school, her school uniform was ordered from the best dressmaker in the city. The boring grey pinafore prescribed by the rules was turned by the craftswoman into an elegant, exquisite outfit. Her parents, without a doubt, spoiled their only daughter. Grandmothers, grandfathers, uncles, and aunts actively helped them in this. Sarah was the only child in the whole large family, like that Billy Johnson from the famous poem, and she, like the cartoon hero, was loved and cherished. But apparently they raised her correctly nonetheless. Having everything, Sarah never showed arrogance. She always had many friends, and her parents deliberately accustomed the girl to independence and, despite boundless love, set certain requirements: good grades, participation in clubs and sections, obedience. And yet, and yet, her mother and father could not fulfill Sarah's main dream. From the age of 4, the girl begged them to give her a little sister. She dreamed of another girl appearing in the family. She could play with her, share secrets, laugh together, just like with that friend from her dreams. Sarah would braid her hair, share toys, teach her everything she knew herself: how to read, dress beautifully, play. They would go for walks together. Life would become much more joyful and interesting. Beside her, such a dear, close person. Sarah was even willing to have a brother, or even better, 2 little brothers or sisters at once. After all, people do have twins. But this dream of hers remained unfulfilled. Growing up, Sarah understood. It was too late. Her mother and father were close in age to her friend's grandparents, and they had her themselves at a rather mature age. Perhaps this wasn't accidental. Now, from films and books, the girl knew that sometimes people simply couldn't have children. It seemed her parents had exactly this problem. One day, luck smiled on them. A daughter was born. On that, fate's gifts apparently ended. Sarah adored her father and was very close to her mother. Complete understanding reigned in their home. The girl didn't remember ever being seriously scolded or punished. Usually, she shared all her secrets and worries with her parents. And yet, for some reason, she never once told them about the girl from her dreams. Perhaps she feared that her mother and father would convince her that it was just fantasies, or even worse, would get scared and take her to a psychologist. No, let this girl remain Sarah's personal secret. Sarah herself, as she grew older, began to form various assumptions about her dream friend. Sometimes it seemed to her that it was her unrealized desire to have a sister. At times, she thought that at night she met her inner self. After all, the girl was her exact copy. And sometimes she even allowed herself to fantasize about parallel worlds, the transition between which opened in her dreams, and the girl was precisely from there, from another dimension. In short, Sarah had plenty of theories and reflections. Sarah adjusted her blanket and hugged her soft teddy bear tighter. Yes, at 14 she still loved sleeping with plush toys and wasn't at all ashamed of it, unlike many of her peers. Sarah was in no hurry to grow up. With soft animals, she felt cozier, calmer, more pleasant. And here was Jasper the cat purring nearby, simply idyllic. Her parents were still awake. They often stayed up late, talking or watching a movie. How close her mother and father were. And this was wonderful. Sarah valued the peace and tranquility in their family because by 14 she had already seen her friend's parents divorce and had even witnessed loud quarrels and arguments in other families. Fortunately, nothing like that ever happened in their cozy home. Now her parents were quietly talking about something. Music from a film played in the background. Sarah involuntarily listened. Interesting. What were they talking about? Maybe they were making plans for the summer? The last school quarter would start soon. It would fly by quickly. And then, the long-awaited holidays. Surely they would fly to the sea or go to some other interesting place. Most likely, this was what they were deciding right now. But, making out the words, Sarah understood. They were talking about something else, not summer vacation. "She's still little," insisted her mother. By the tone, it was clear she was arguing with her father, an unprecedented thing. Usually there was always agreement between her parents. "How is she little?" argued her father. "She's already a teenager." Exactly. Even worse. Teenagers are emotionally unstable. Growing up is difficult as it is. There's no need for her to know anything now. "But she'll find out anyway, sooner or later," insisted her father. "They know where we live now. Do you think it will be better if Sarah learns the truth from them? From strangers? That will only frighten her." "We'll move," countered her mother. "You're being transferred to Moscow after all. We've been thinking about moving to the capital for a long time. Now is just the right time. Talk to your boss. Let them speed up the transfer." "Eleanor, our daughter must know the truth, no matter how difficult it is, especially now that they know where we are, when they are seeking a meeting." "No, Robert," her mother hotly objected. "Not now. Definitely not now. We'll move this summer. And for now, Sarah and I are going to my cousin's place in Altai. She's been inviting us for a long time. You sort everything out here for now." "What about school?" Her father couldn't calm down. "What about school? The last quarter is always short and hectic. Nothing terrible will happen if Sarah misses a month. I've already arranged it with the teachers. They'll give her annual grades." "Yes, you'll stay with your aunt," her father supported. "The nature there is amazing. It'll make your head spin." Sarah didn't object. The idea of missing the last quarter appealed to her. A trip instead of boring lessons. What could be better? She just really wanted to understand. Why did her parents suddenly need to take her so far away? Who were they hiding from? Why were they running? What truth were they concealing from her? Sarah's imagination was working at full capacity. She and her mother travelled to Altai by train. For all 3 days of the journey, the girl was building theories. Maybe her father's business partners were threatening him. Or perhaps her parents had an enemy from the past from whom they were forced to hide. What if she had some wayward older brother who had grown up, become a bandit, and was now showing up for some reason? Her father had said someone found out where they lived. This was the reason for all this fuss with the trip and moving to the capital. Sarah decided that now she would deliberately go to bed late. Maybe she could overhear her mother and aunt's conversation. Surely they would discuss the situation. But the new place gave her so many impressions and emotions that she somehow even forgot about her parents' secret. Amazing nature, new friends, even her first crush. This trip turned out to be very bright and eventful for Sarah. An array of exciting events pushed out the anxious thoughts. As always at such times, Sarah stopped seeing that girl in her dreams. Nothing surprising. Sarah had long noticed. When her life was full of adventures and strong emotions, the dream friend would temporarily disappear. But then she always reappeared. Sarah left her aunt's place almost in tears. She liked this wonderful place so much. She had already broken up with her first love. But here, Sarah made so many friends. They accompanied her and her mother to the station together with her aunt and uncle. The girl never returned to her hometown. She didn't even have time to say goodbye to her friends. She and her mother went directly to Moscow, to a new apartment. Her father had settled everything in those couple of months, arranged the work transfer, found housing, organized the move. Sarah liked the new place. A spacious apartment, stylish furniture, a magnificent view from the window, and very close by, literally within walking distance, so many interesting things. Red Square, and a huge zoo, and the Tretyakov Gallery, amusement parks, amazing exhibitions, stunning cafes and restaurants. It was great just walking around Moscow, both during the day and especially in the evening, when lights lit up everywhere and music played. Summer flew by unnoticed. It was time to go to school. Sarah was very worried about how the class would receive her, the new girl. On the eve of September 1st, her dream friend finally came to her, for the first time in a long while. She hugged Sarah's shoulders encouragingly. The girl looked at her with sympathy and a quiet smile, clearly offering support. Sarah was very happy about her appearance. She had so much to share with her. The girl from her dreams, as always, listened attentively and remained silent. But Sarah felt the energy of warmth emanating from her, enveloping her, giving her confidence. "Everything will be fine for you at the new school," her friend seemed to instill in her. And so it was. Sarah quickly integrated into the group, and life went on as usual. It happened on a fine May evening. Sarah was returning home after classes. She was finishing her third year at the medical academy. She was one of the most promising students in the faculty, of which she was rightly proud. Medicine consumed her. Finding the cause of a patient's ailment, that's a real detective story. Sarah loved solving complex puzzles since childhood. Unlike most of her classmates, she had already decided on her specialization: cardiology. The mysteries of the heart attracted her. But there was also a personal motive: her mother. She had recently suffered a heart attack. Sarah wanted to help her and other such patients. The young woman carefully watched the road, sitting behind the wheel of her own car. Her father gave it to her for her 18th birthday. And for almost 2 years now, Sarah had been driving around in a car instead of being jostled in a crowded bus. The picture was slightly marred by traffic jams, but Sarah was used to them and accepted them as a given. She liked being behind the wheel. She would turn on her favorite music, roll down the window to let the wind blow through the cabin and speed down the highway. Beautiful. Sarah was a very careful driver, always strictly followed the rules, and kept an eye on the situation. Driving brought pleasure, but she never lost her vigilance behind the wheel. That evening, everything was as usual. The impact came from where Sarah didn't expect it, from the right. The young woman, as she should, was crossing the intersection on a green light. But the driver of an old, rusty Zhiguli with loud music blaring from open windows, apparently, didn't want to wait. He ran a red light. Later, it turned out that the 17-year-old boy, who hadn't yet gotten his license, had been heavily drinking that evening and took his brother's car without permission to impress his girlfriend, to show what a reckless driver he was. Well, he certainly made an impression. At high speed, he crashed into Sarah's car. Strangely enough, nothing serious happened to him personally, only his face was scratched by small glass fragments. But his passenger suffered. The young woman was taken to the hospital with multiple fractures. Sarah felt a powerful impact. The car spun around. The young woman understood that she was trapped in the twisted metal. The car body deformed, crumpled. Sarah was trapped. She didn't feel pain as such, shock was at work. But as a future medical professional, she perfectly understood the severity of her injuries. A fractured femur, at the very least. Her spine, fortunately, seemed intact, but a deep, jagged wound formed on her abdomen. This was the most dangerous thing. While waiting for rescuers and the ambulance, the young woman saw her light-colored t-shirt quickly soaking with blood. She had severe bleeding. Her head was spinning. Spots and blobs swam before her eyes. People were crowding around. Some guys were trying to help her, pull her out of the cabin. They brought tools, unscrewed something, but they couldn't do anything. The second car suffered less damage. It flew off to the side of the road. Sarah saw the unconscious young woman lying on the asphalt, and beside her, squatting with his face in his hands, rocked the accident's culprit. It was slowly dawning on him what he had done. It seems Sarah lost consciousness for a while. She didn't remember how the rescuers arrived, how she was extracted from the mangled cabin. She didn't see the doctors loading her into the ambulance. Sarah regained consciousness when she was being wheeled on a gurney, apparently to the operating room. The surgeons were already ready. Masks, white coats, caps. Beside the gurney, her parents walked hastily, pale, frightened, anxious. Someone had already managed to call them, inform them of what had happened, and they, of course, rushed there immediately. Sarah, strangely enough, felt neither pain nor fear. Everything happening seemed like a dream. "We'll need blood." Sarah heard the voice of one of the doctors right by her ear. "They're already bringing it from the blood bank. Her parents didn't match. They both have B positive, and the young woman has O negative." Sarah suddenly felt herself losing consciousness again. Dark spots flickered before her eyes, blurring into blobs. Falling into oblivion, the young woman managed to wonder, "How can this be? My mother and father have B positive, and I have O negative. That's not possible." Sarah studied genetics and knew this for sure. And then the young woman somehow immediately found herself at the edge of a dark forest. It was the very beginning of autumn, her favorite time of year. The leaves were just starting to turn yellow. Bright flowers dotted the field in front of the forest. Sarah inhaled the fresh, clean air with pleasure, filled with the scent of herbs. There was no doubt. This was one of those very dreams. Soon she would appear here, the friend Sarah had known all her life. A wonderful dream, and now her support was very much needed. A slender young woman, indeed, appeared from behind the bushes in a long sundress of a wondrous light blue shade. She was smiling, but her eyes were somehow anxious. As always, silently, she approached Sarah. The young women settled right into the soft grass, leaning their backs against the rough trunk of a tree. Both didn't utter a word, but understood each other perfectly. Now the girl from the dream was trying to encourage her friend, suggesting that everything would be fine. Sarah understood. She had nothing to worry about. The girl from her dreams was never wrong, and certainly never lied. But the anxiety in her friend's eyes, that was unsettling, a hidden sadness. Sarah had noticed before. Her friend was clearly worried about something, but she, as usual, remained silent. Sarah mentally asked how she was doing. She smiled in response, waved her hand carelessly, as if not wanting to upset her. But Sarah saw, perfectly understood, that something was happening with her longtime friend, and they were seeing each other much less often. All this was strange. Sarah didn't know how long she had spent at the edge of the forest, sitting in the grass and admiring the fantastically beautiful sunset. There are none like that in the real world. The sky blazed and shimmered with bright red, purple and deep blue hues. The sight was mesmerizing, calming, relaxing. Then the dream friend stood up, smiled goodbye, and disappeared. She didn't walk away, didn't hide behind a bush, but simply seemed to dissolve into the air. Sarah never managed to notice this moment. It seemed her friend vanished the moment Sarah blinked. A fraction of a second was enough for her. So, the wonderful dream would soon end. It was always like this. And indeed, Sarah opened her eyes and immediately squeezed them shut again. Bright light, white walls. Oh, it would have been better to stay with her dream friend at the edge of the wonderful forest for just a little longer. It was so good, so easy there. And now? Now Sarah's whole body ached. She felt nauseous. Her head was very dizzy. There was a nasty taste of medicine in her mouth. A tube stuck out of her vein. An uncomfortable pressure bandage was applied to her abdomen. Even breathing was difficult. Sarah spent a couple of days in intensive care. She had undergone serious surgery. It turned out she was on the verge of life and death. The surgeon later confessed he was afraid he wouldn't pull her through, but everything worked out. Soon Sarah was transferred to a regular ward. She was recovering quickly. A young, healthy body, the doctor explained. In a couple of months, there wouldn't even be any consequences left. This couldn't help but be pleasing. In the hospital, Sarah clearly realized that she was very, very lucky. 10 minutes of delay could have cost her her life. She had lost enough blood. Just a little more. And that would have been it. By the way, about the blood. The young woman often thought about what she had heard while losing consciousness on the gurney. The doctors said that both her parents had blood type B positive, and she herself had O negative. But she could not possibly have inherited such a blood type and Rh factor from her mother and father. This contradicts all laws of genetics. What was the matter? For now, the young woman decided not to ask her parents unnecessary questions. They were so worried. Her mother and father visited her in the hospital every day, brought treats that she had nowhere to put. Sarah shared the treats with her ward mates, and there was still a lot left over. And then Sarah was discharged. Some more time passed, and the young woman returned to her former life, studies, meeting friends, parties. As the doctor promised, the consequences of the accident didn't make themselves known. Everything worked out. Only one thing changed. Her car was beyond repair. So her father bought his daughter a new one, this time a small SUV. For safety, he explained his choice. If you had been in that accident in this beast, you would have gotten off with a slight scare. Sarah didn't object. She liked the new car much more than the previous one. So stylish, powerful, large. On Sarah's 20th birthday, when the guests, relatives, and closest friends had left, the birthday girl and her mother were washing dishes in the kitchen. This was their long-standing tradition, celebrating Sarah's birthday with numerous relatives. The young woman would gather her friends on the following Saturday. But today was a warm family celebration. Some relatives specifically came to the capital for her anniversary from other cities. After all, she had a wonderful family. The conversation flowed easily and naturally. Mother and daughter discussed the celebration in detail, shared impressions, laughed, joked, made plans. "Tell me about the day you gave birth to me," Sarah suddenly asked. The question was not accidental. The young woman wanted to prompt her mother into a frank conversation and finally clarify everything. "I will probably become a mother someday too. I'm interested in everything." "Was it long? What did you feel when you saw me? What was I like in the first minutes after birth?" Her mother hesitated, but quickly composed herself. "Everything happened so quickly and unexpectedly. I don't even really remember anything. Clear, Sarah sighed. She understood that her mother was not entirely sincere. How could one forget such an event, especially a long-awaited one? Her parents often told her how much they dreamed of a child, but years passed, and there were no children. They had already despaired, and then joyful news. Sarah became a real gift of fate for them, though a little late. Her mother was clearly avoiding the answer. This further strengthened Sarah's suspicions. Perhaps the young woman looked at her mother in a peculiar way. Maybe distrust was readable in her gaze. Because, "No, I can't do this anymore." Her mother suddenly turned off the water and sank heavily onto a chair. "Robert, come here, to the kitchen." Her father entered with a smile. He had just finished vacuuming. Seeing his wife's anxious face, he immediately became serious. "It's time to tell her everything." The woman looked at her husband. He paled slightly, shivered, and then silently nodded and asked their daughter to sit down. Sarah understood that the very family secret she had suspected for several years was about to be revealed to her. Subconsciously, the young woman knew what her parents were hiding. She understood this when she heard the doctors talking about blood types. Putting two and two together wasn't difficult. "The thing is," her mother's voice broke, and she looked helplessly at her father. He took the initiative. "Sarah, you know we love you very, very much," he said. Sarah nodded. She was absolutely sure of this. Few of her acquaintances were surrounded by such love, attention, and care. "You're quite grown up now," her father continued. "And of course you have the right to know. You are… we are… we adopted you," her mother finished for her husband. Sarah exhaled loudly. Her ears pounded. She suspected this was the case, but it was one thing to make guesses, another to hear the truth. A swarm of questions immediately arose in her mind. Who are my real parents? Do you know where they are? Do I have brothers or sisters? Why was I given up? Her parents exchanged bewildered glances. I just need to know so much. I'm practically bursting with questions. There's a whole bunch of them. But we don't have answers to nearly all of them." Her mother shook her head. "Your biological mother. I only know that she was very young, from a disadvantaged family. A child herself. What would she do with a baby? You didn't have brothers or sisters at that time. What about now? Who knows? We never met your family. We only know about them from the words of the orphanage staff." The man looked at his wife in surprise. Sarah understood that she was again holding something back. "Mother, this time please be completely frank with me," the young woman asked. "Don't hide anything. I'm an adult, ready for any truth. This will not affect my attitude towards you in any way. You are my parents. I love you very much." "Well, it wasn't quite as I just told you," her mother confessed. "I just changed the story a little. There's an unpleasant detail for you there. It's not particularly significant, really. But since you want complete frankness, then please. This family you were born into, they were my grandmother's neighbors. And you could say we bought you from them. I didn't want you to know about it." "Bought you?" Sarah repeated. An unpleasant chill ran down her spine at that word. "How is that?" "Well, as your mother already said, you were born to a young woman from a disadvantaged family." Her father joined the conversation. "She didn't have an abortion in time, and then it was too late." Grandma Eleanor noticed the young neighbor's belly, talked to her mother. She said they were planning to give the child to an orphanage, and my grandmother, she suggested giving the baby, meaning you, to us. All the relatives knew how much we dreamed of a baby. And then such an opportunity arose. Your family. They are poor, but healthy, strong, good genes. Taking from an orphanage, you could get a pig in a poke there. But they realized we desperately needed a child. Her mother joined the story. They started bargaining, demanded money. And who would condemn them? The woman was raising 5 children alone. Your biological mother was the oldest. They were truly in great need. We gave them enough money to improve their financial situation. And when you were born, they simply gave you to us. It was difficult to process the documents for a child obtained in such a way later. But we managed, sorted everything out. You didn't spend a single day in an orphanage. And where are they now? Sarah's voice trembled. Tears welled up in her eyes. Unknown, her parents replied in unison. They left later, her mother explained. Something happened with them there. Apparently they moved to relatives in another city. I don't know where. And I didn't want to know. Why? Over time, I came to believe you were mine. Got used to the idea. And then, when you became a teenager, they reminded us of themselves, her father continued. Your grandmother, the mother of the girl who gave birth to you. She showed up at my work. I don't know where she got the address. She said she needed money. She demanded, threatened to tell you everything. It was a real nightmare. That's why we moved. You and your mother went to Altai, and I handled all the moving issues. We were afraid that this woman, that she might somehow harm you. She had such an aggressive attitude. We were scared, to be honest. Very scared, her mother confirmed. Sarah thought. So that's what her father and mother were talking about many years ago, on the eve of the move, when Sarah accidentally overheard. She remembered that night in the smallest details. It was then that she realized there was some secret in their family. So my blood relatives are impoverished extortionists? Rather, just people driven to despair, her father shrugged. They were very unlucky in life, and in any case that has nothing to do with them. Her mother smiled at the young woman. We raised and brought you up. You are a wonderful person, intelligent, responsible, kind. You are you, and they are somewhere far away. Don't even think about them. But Sarah, of course, couldn't help but think about her unknown relatives. The frank conversation with her parents changed a lot. Now the young woman often tried to imagine her birth mother. She knew little about her. She was, evidently, very young, not much older than Sarah herself, and most likely still lived in poverty. Surely Sarah had younger brothers and sisters? And certainly 4. After all, her parents said her mother was the oldest of 5 children. That's a whole lot of relatives. Sarah adored her parents, but she still often dreamed of them being younger, like her friends' mothers and fathers. And the girl also dreamed of a sister or brothers throughout her childhood. And now it turns out she had all of this. What a fate. Sarah decided that when she got older, she would definitely find her own. And she absolutely had to see them, find out what they were like, how they looked, where they lived, what they did. This was important. Very important. The young woman didn't get any specific information from her parents. According to them, it turned out that at some point Sarah's mother's family moved to another city, and then, many years later, the grandmother suddenly appeared and demanded money in exchange for silence. The search should start in the city where Sarah spent her childhood. This was obvious. Moreover, everything would have to be done in secret from her parents. The young woman saw that her questions caused them pain. They were already quite elderly, and her mother had a bad heart. No, There was no need to worry them unnecessarily. Sarah would figure it out herself. She wasn't little anymore. The young woman travelled to her hometown several times. She was looking for a thread that would lead her to her blood relatives. She sifted through the archives of local maternity hospitals and children's clinics, interviewed old acquaintances and friends of her parents, having previously arranged with them not to inform her mother and father about her visit. But she didn't learn much. It turned out that she was registered as a foundling and immediately handed over to the care of the people who found the infant, her father and mother. The newborn's real parents were, of course, sought out for form's sake, but naturally, they were never found. That was all. Sarah decided she wouldn't give up. Soon she would finish university, get a job, start earning a salary, and then she would have money for detectives. After all, she couldn't manage without professional help. 10 years flew by unnoticed since Sarah made the firm decision to find her birth mother. The young woman changed a lot. She graduated from university with honours, got a job. Almost immediately, she had a romance with a colleague, Michael, a young and promising head of the surgical department. It was true love. The young people didn't delay. They had a noisy, cheerful wedding with guests, a toastmaster, decorated cars, and other paraphernalia. Sarah's parents were happy. They raised their daughter, educated her, married her off. Now they could relax and wait for grandchildren. Sarah and Michael decided not to rush with children. The young woman wanted to establish herself in her profession. She liked being a doctor. She was not mistaken. Cardiology indeed became her life's work. Nevertheless, 3 years after the wedding, the family grew. Sarah and Michael had wonderful twin daughters. The young parents decided to surprise the grandparents. They didn't say there would be 2 children until the birth itself. Everyone was surprised at the discharge. But they were also happy, of course. Sarah's mother even shed a tear. What a miracle! I couldn't believe my eyes. Sarah's mother-in-law examined the newborn granddaughters. Double happiness. No one in our family has ever had twins. Perhaps this luck came to the family through your line. Sarah smiled and didn't answer. Michael's parents didn't know her story. Not because the young woman was shy, she simply didn't want to unnecessarily involve people in such details. She herself didn't know if there were twins in her family. Sarah enjoyed motherhood. It was difficult, but the grandparents actively helped. The girls grew, delighting relatives on both sides. Sarah's mother, looking at her granddaughters, sometimes couldn't hold back tears. To think, what happiness! I lived to see grandchildren. But the happiness for the elderly woman was short-lived. Age, a bad heart. One day, Sarah's mother had another heart attack, and this time she couldn't be saved. Sarah bore the loss heavily. The person who had done so much for her, who had loved her so much, was gone. The orphaned Sarah was supported by her husband, in-laws, and friends. The little ones constantly needed their mother and didn't let her fall into apathy. And yet, it was her father who pulled Sarah out of her stupor. One day, she noticed how her father had aged and grown thin, and realized that he needed help and support much more than she did. Since then, Sarah came to her parents' apartment every day. In the morning, she would put her daughters in the car and drive to her father's. Together, they played with the children, recalled the past, cooked, cleaned, and looked at photographs. There were many of them, several thick, worn albums. Sarah wondered why these pictures hadn't attracted her before. After all, they were a living, visual history of her family. Here's her mother, a very young student, so cheerful, carefree. And here's her father, a young intern, serious, thoughtful. One of Sarah's daughters remarkably resembled her grandfather. The woman sometimes even forgot that they didn't share genes. Often, her father would take the little ones and go out into the yard with them. Sarah admired from the window how they played happily. The elderly man literally blossomed next to his granddaughters. They gave him the strength to live on. Sarah was cleaning and fussing in the kitchen at this time. Her father wasn't used to managing the household on his own. He said he didn't need much on his own. But his daughter tried very hard, cooked his favorite dishes. True, they didn't turn out as tasty as her mother's, but it was still better than nothing. In the last decades, so many significant events had happened in Sarah's life, both good and sad. It's no wonder that the woman temporarily put aside the idea of searching for her blood relatives. No, she always remembered it, but she didn't have time for family secrets. So many worries, so many incidents, so many problems that needed urgent resolution. The friend from her dreams came to Sarah less and less often. Now she appeared once every 3 or 4 months. And of course, she grew up with Sarah. They still didn't talk, but understood each other perfectly without words and were very happy to meet. On a fine May day, Sarah was sitting on the sofa in her parents' apartment, with her legs tucked under her, flipping through an album. Through the open window came the cheerful voices of her daughters. They had started an active game with their grandfather. He was all for it. Her father had told Sarah more than once that his granddaughters made him stay in shape, didn't let him get down. Sarah smiled, looking at the old pictures. She hadn't seen these before. Black and white, with scalloped edges. They were over half a century old, almost antiques. Nevertheless, the photographs still held the smell of printer's ink. One of the pictures particularly attracted Sarah's attention. On it, she noticed her mother at the age of 12 or 13. It was definitely her. Sarah recognized the large, wide-open eyes, curly hair, and a mole on her cheek. Sarah had seen few photos of her mother at that age, so now she was examining this old picture with interest. The girl mother was sitting surrounded by adults, probably her parents and some older relatives. An interesting thought flashed through Sarah's mind. Before, people were written on the back of photos and important notes were made. Year, place. The woman took the photo out of the album, turned it over, just as she thought. In neat handwriting on the yellowed cardboard, someone had written the words, from left to right: Helen, Ivan, Semenov, Zoe, Florence, Eleanor, Alexeyevka, 1959, July. Eleanor, that's the girl, meaning Sarah's mother. Florence, her maternal grandmother. Her mother said she named her only daughter after her beloved grandma. The woman didn't know the other people. Maybe her parents had told her about these relatives once, but who would have listened carefully then? And Alexeyevka, apparently, is the name of the very village where Sarah was born. That is where her blood relatives once lived. Her parents said that Sarah was born to a young neighbor of her mother's grandmother, this very Florence, pictured in the photograph. Grandma Florence helped her granddaughter and her husband become parents. It's not surprising that they named their daughter after her. Everything fits. So, Sarah's small homeland is Alexeyevka. Maybe people who know her relatives still live there. Sarah closed the album and exhaled heavily. Alexeyevka. That's where the search should begin. The desire to find her biological mother, which had slumbered for a while, revived with new force. Sarah realized she could no longer sit idly by. It was time to learn the truth about her relatives, no matter how bitter or unpleasant it was. Scary, of course. But how could she live on without knowing her roots? She had to learn about her birth family, if only for the sake of her daughters. At home, Sarah shared her thoughts with Michael. Her husband always supported his beloved wife in everything. Of course, he knew her difficult story. "I'm with you," the man simply replied after listening to Sarah. "When do we go?" The woman smiled. She didn't expect any other reaction from Michael. With him, nothing was scary. They would overcome everything. They decided to go the very next weekend. What was the point of delaying? The sooner Sarah learned the truth, the better. During the week, they carried out all the preparatory measures. Michael arranged with his parents to take the granddaughters for 2 days. Sarah found out where Alexeyevka was located and how to get there, and she also filled her car's fuel tank to the brim. On the eve of the fateful trip, the woman couldn't fall asleep at all. Her heart pounded. Her hands and feet felt like cotton. Michael had long been peacefully snoring on his side of the bed, while she kept staring at the ceiling. Sarah didn't understand herself. What did she want more? To find her birth family in Alexeyevka and meet the people who once sold her to strangers? Or to find no trace of her biological mother in this village at all? In the morning, Sarah and Michael were already driving along the country highway. The woman was sitting in the passenger seat. In such a state, it was better not to drive. Sarah was so nervous that she occasionally trembled. Michael, seeing his wife's worries, tried his best to encourage her. Fields, meadows, and plantations ran along both sides of the highway. Villages and settlements flashed by from time to time. The couple left at dawn. They reached Alexeyevka closer to noon. The sun was already high in the sky. "Well, here we are." Michael parked the car by a modest sign with the village's name. It was a small settlement with deserted, narrow streets. The houses varied, some very small, leaning, blackened by time, and others sturdy, quite modern, with satellite dishes. "And how do we find the right house?" Sarah asked, bewildered. "Asking doesn't cost anything," Michael replied carelessly and confidently moved forward. Sarah hurried after him. First, they simply walked around the village, taking a look. Sarah looked around in surprise. She had never been to such a place. Quiet, sparsely populated, calm, even sleepy. Curious chickens and cautious cats scurried in the road dust. Muffled conversations drifted from some yards. The air was filled with the smells of homemade food, mixed with the aromas of sun-heated herbs. Soon the couple came out onto a spacious clearing, something like a square, and here they finally met people. Several old men sat on a bench under a sprawling tree and were discussing something. Women in colourful robes were chatting on the porch of the shop. Toddlers clung to the hems of 2 of them. A little further off, by a building resembling a warehouse, a group of children was playing. Tanned, dirty-faced, and barefoot boys and girls. "And here are the locals," Michael summarized. People noticed the strangers and openly stared at them, glancing furtively, observing decorum. But of course these glances did not escape Sarah and Michael. The children behaved more openly, stopped playing, and looked at the newcomers with curiosity. Apparently, Alexeyevka wasn't often visited by outsiders. Michael approached the women on the porch, smiled charmingly and greeted them. "And hello to you," one of the ladies responded. "Who have you come to see here?" "Not anyone specific," Michael began to explain. "We just want to find one house. My wife's great-grandmother's house. Purely out of interest. This woman's name was Florence Rogacheva. Maybe you remember Grandma Florence?" "Grandma Florence?" responded a red-haired woman with bright green eyes. A chubby little boy clung tightly to her hand, also red-haired and covered in freckles. "Of course we remember. She was good, kind. She simply adored us children. She dreamed of great-grandchildren very much. She didn't have any yet then. So, you are her great-granddaughter. The oldest woman in the group was scrutinizing Sarah with her eyes. The others were younger, around 35 to 40. This one, by age, could have been a mother to one of them. Yes, I am her great-granddaughter. I just want to see where my great-grandmother lived and learn more about my roots. Sarah noticed that the women were whispering and looking at her strangely. It was unpleasant. The house is on the 3rd street from here, on Flower Street, number 19, the elderly woman replied. But no one lives there anymore. It's been empty since old Florence died. Your parents couldn't sell it. Who needs to move to our remote village? No fools were found. Michael and Sarah thanked the women and moved on. Why were they looking at me like that? Sarah wondered. Did you notice? They almost drilled holes in us with their stares. Nothing surprising. A new face and a relative of their fellow villager whom everyone knew. People are just curious. Don't worry about it. But they were whispering about something, Sarah continued. I heard something like, looks like 2 drops of water, and blood is thicker than water. Who do they think I look like? Not Grandma Florence, right? We don't even share genes, as it turned out. Well, maybe they don't know this story. Michael shrugged. So they saw a resemblance. I don't know. I think such an event would have been hard to hide in a village. Most likely people are aware. Perhaps. Then it's even more understandable why they were staring. And here's the house we need. Michael pointed with his hand to a leaning fence. Behind the dilapidated fence stretched an overgrown garden. Weeds had taken over the entire area. They even managed to grow on the roof of the blackened shed. In the center of this green sea stood a small house. Once, perhaps, it was painted bright blue. Now it was faded and peeling. The windows were broken. The door hung on one hinge. It was clear that everything inside had long been overgrown with dust and cobwebs. Surely it was a paradise for insects and small animals. Somehow I don't want to go in there. Sarah shook her head. I don't like any of this. Yes, I don't feel like it either, Michael agreed. He took a few pictures of the house and garden and then added, but we didn't actually come here for this house, right? We need to find information about your relatives. That is, to find the house where they once lived. I understand it's the neighbors across the street, Sarah said and turned around. My mother, when she told me, said exactly that. The neighbor's house across from Grandma's. Michael also turned around. Now they were both looking at another house. It was small, shabby, but clearly inhabited. Trimmed grass, curtains on the windows, a forgotten book on the bench, a few neat garden beds, carrots, onions, peppers. Someone definitely lived here. And what do we do? Sarah asked, looking at Michael. We'll just knock and ask who lives here. Excellent idea, Michael approved and moved towards the gate. Sarah stopped her husband. Maybe it's better to observe for a while. Let's wait until someone appears in the garden or at the gate, and then we'll approach. Otherwise, it feels a bit awkward. As you say, Michael didn't argue. Only we might sit here like this until evening. Who knows? Maybe the people are at work. But Sarah insisted. She was afraid of meeting the inhabitants of the house. After all, they could turn out to be her relatives, or, on the contrary, people who knew absolutely nothing about them. Then the search would hit a dead end. Which option was better? Sarah didn't have an answer to this question yet. The couple sat down on a sun-warmed boulder by the fence of the abandoned house on Flower Street. Poor little houses stood there. Many, like Sarah's great-grandmother's dwelling, were empty and overgrown with weeds. Poverty and desolation. a sad sight. Sarah tried to imagine this street in the past, when it was lively and inhabited. Probably children's voices echoed here, boys on bicycles scurried back and forth, and laundry hung in the yards. Now, this area resembled a ghost town. And yet, and yet, someone still remained here. Sarah didn't know how long she and Michael had sat there like that, closely watching the neighbour's house. Probably more than an hour had passed. At least, the sun was already setting. The man, it seemed, had even dozed off. Sarah didn't disturb him. She, as always, was fantasizing, imagining different scenarios, and for some reason, all of them frightened her. What happened next, she definitely didn't expect. The door of the house across the street suddenly quietly opened a crack. A woman in a wheelchair appeared on the porch. Down the homemade wooden ramp, she descended from the porch and briskly rolled towards the bench on which a forgotten book lay. Sarah nudged Michael with her elbow. He opened his eyes and also stared at the inhabitant of the old house. She had just turned her back to them. It was time to act. The couple got up from their spot and approached the fence. "Hello," Michael called out in the friendliest tone. Sarah also greeted her. The woman turned around, looked at the guests with curiosity. Sarah and Michael exhaled in surprise. The inhabitant of the house made a similar sound. Her eyebrows shot up sharply, her eyes widened. Sarah grabbed her husband's hand so as not to fall. Unable to believe her eyes, she examined the woman in the wheelchair, while the latter stared intently at her. "This simply cannot be," flashed through Sarah's mind. It was her friend from her dreams. The very one she had known all her life. They had grown and changed together. This is simply incredible. "Finally," Michael broke the silence. "I don't understand anything at all. You are so alike, an amazing resemblance." The man didn't express himself quite accurately. Sarah and the woman in the wheelchair didn't just resemble each other, they were exact copies. Identical eyes, nose, and lips. Slightly wavy light brown hair. Both slender and tall. And even their tans were of an identical shade. Coffee with milk. "Is that really you?" the woman said, stunned. A joyful sparkle appeared in her eyes. "I don't believe this. Come in, guests." They didn't hesitate. "Maybe you'd like some tea or water. I even have compote." Sarah shook her head negatively. Her power of speech had not yet returned. "Please sit down," the hostess continued to fuss. "You can sit here on the bench. You can go to the backyard. I have a gazebo there." Michael led Sarah to the bench and helped her settle down. He sat down beside her. The woman wheeled up to them and began examining Sarah again, this time with a gentle smile. "So this is what you're like. I imagined you just like this." "Who are you?" Sarah raised her eyes to the woman. The hostess's warm smile encouraged her, helped her compose herself. "Well, let's get acquainted. My name is Maria. I am your twin sister. We are twins, as you can easily guess from our appearance." "You're just copies of each other," Michael remarked. "Like clones." "Monozygotic twins are essentially clones." The doctor in Sarah awoke. "Educational page," her husband teased good-naturedly. "Well, now let's figure out your complicated story. That's what we came here for, right?" "Yes," Sarah echoed, looking into Maria's eyes. "Tell me everything you know. My parents, the people who raised me, hid the truth from me for a long time. And even afterwards, they didn't like talking about it." "There's nothing unexpected about that," Maria shrugged. "If I were your parents, I probably would have acted exactly the same way." "Well, My grandmother told me everything. Not right away. I was already an adult. Grandma then learned that she would die soon. She didn't want to take this story with her. Sarah suddenly did what she had wanted to do for a long time. She took her sister's hand. Both felt as if they had been hit by a charge. The women looked at each other, smiled broadly and hugged. It felt so natural, as if there hadn't been long years of separation. In her sister's embrace, Sarah felt warm and calm. Maria, apparently, felt the same way. Sarah somehow inexplicably understood her sister's feelings. Perhaps this was that very amazing connection between twins. Michael looked at the women and couldn't suppress a smile. Then he took out his phone and took a few pictures. For memory, he explained to the twins. The moment is very interesting. Indian soap operas can't even compare. Both women smiled cheerfully. By the way, our story will indeed be more interesting than any Indian soap opera, Maria remarked, and began her story. Many years ago, a large family lived in this very house. A single mother, Brenda, with 5 children. There wasn't enough money to feed such a crowd. The woman was at work from morning till night. She worked as a cleaner on the collective farm, then as a dishwasher in the canteen. And so doing odd jobs, moonlighting, weeding gardens, helping around the yard. She worked like a squirrel in a wheel, and still the family lived in poverty. Brenda's husband had long been missing. He left for work in the capital, and that was it, gone for good. Either something happened, or he decided to start a new life. The woman also didn't rule out the second option. Be that as it may, she was left completely alone with 5 children. The eldest daughter, Tracy, was a support at first. She looked after the younger ones, cleaned, even cooked. Any work she did was done quickly and efficiently. She was nimble, handy, and housewifely. Her mother couldn't praise Tracy enough. And then the girl grew up, and it was as if something snapped in her. From a compliant home child, Tracy turned into a prickly, difficult teenager. Grandma said that Tracy, our mother, started demanding expensive clothes and money for entertainment, and also insulting her mother for not being able to provide a normal existence. Tracy suddenly wanted a beautiful life. She dreamed of dressing fashionably, going to the city for discos, using expensive cosmetics. Of course, a cleaner mother couldn't fulfill the desires of her rapidly growing daughter. Brenda hoped that Tracy's behavior was nothing more than a teenage rebellion. She knew that sometimes it was difficult for children to grow up, and hoped that time would pass and her daughter would be the same again. But the older the girl got, the more the problem worsened. Her mother couldn't provide Tracy with a beautiful life. The girl raged a bit and accepted this fact. Yes, she was from a poor family. Her mother didn't even have money for food and clothes. And that meant she had to look for other sponsors. That was all. Young, pretty Tracy, of course, found them without difficulty. It was enough to show up in a miniskirt at the city disco once. The teenage girl acquired older suitors and new friends. Tracy already looked like an adult, dressed and behaved accordingly. But in essence, she was still just a child who didn't even know life. Her mother's heart ached with fear and anxiety. But she couldn't do anything. The girl didn't care about her at all. Should she chain her to the radiator? Brenda tried to influence her wayward child. She scolded, punished, even locked her at home. But she always ran away, found a way to slip out, and towards adventures and a beautiful, cheerful life. Sometimes Tracy disappeared in the city for days. Then she would show up at home. She smelled of cigarettes, sharp perfume. Her whole appearance indicated that she had developed a taste for drinking. Her mother desperately tried to reason with her child, gave examples, scared her with consequences, told her how cruel people could be. But Tracy only smirked. She lived gaily, freely, brightly. Her new friends had money, and they denied the young charmer nothing. Of course, she also had to pay in some sense, but this didn't bother Tracy. The young woman started disappearing from home more often. Her absences became longer. And then one day, a neighbor, whose children studied in the city, reported that Tracy was living with some man as his wife. Now the young woman didn't appear in Alexeyevka at all, only occasionally called to say that she was fine. Brenda, meanwhile, was beside herself with worry, sensing something bad in her heart. Tracy was living with an adult man who had come for work from another country. What if he took her far away, and she would never see her again? Or something even worse would happen. People said that this man drank a lot, and the woman knew nothing else about her young daughter's chosen one. Several months passed, and then one dark February night, there was a knock at the door. Her daughter stood on the threshold, gaunt, pale, with dark circles under her eyes, and a huge belly on which her winter coat no longer buttoned. It turned out that Tracy's man had returned to his homeland. He already had a family there. He wasn't planning to leave his wife or abandon his children. And then Tracy with this pregnancy. He sent her for an abortion. She wasn't against it. But at the hospital, it turned out that the deadline had passed. She would have to give birth. The future father preferred to return home. He didn't need these problems. Tracy went to her mother in Alexeyevka. Where else could she go? She didn't know how to work, and she didn't want to. Life in the city was expensive. Brenda, despite the circumstances, was happy about her daughter's return. First, she fed her, then hugged her tightly. They even cried together. Times were hard. The family was living in poverty. Brenda worked tirelessly, but they paid little money, and sometimes delayed it. More and more often, the woman thought that they wouldn't be able to manage Tracy's baby, especially since a young woman with a small child wouldn't be able to go to work for a long time. And the family was already barely making ends meet. The younger children were even teased at school for their shabby clothes and lack of necessary supplies. The problem solved itself. One evening, a neighbor came to visit, elderly Florence. As always, she brought treats for the children, hot pies, candies, jam. And then she had a long and serious conversation with the hostess. Everyone in the village knew that Eleanor, Florence's granddaughter, couldn't have children. She had been married for a long time, but there were no children. She even had treatment somewhere, but it didn't help. And they were a good, well-off family. They lived in a large apartment, had a decent salary. They had a car, flew to the sea every year for vacation. They could give a child everything, show them the world, shower them with toys and clothes. But years passed, and there was no baby. Brenda sighed heavily. They had enough of this good thing, meaning children. Look, another one would appear soon. How to raise them, what to feed them. There were more questions than answers. And why was everything in the world so strangely and unfairly arranged? And then Florence laid out her plan. She offered a large sum of money for Tracy's baby, who was about to be born. Eleanor and her husband Robert would adopt the baby. At first, Brenda reacted to the proposal with hostility. How could this be? What kind of savagery? Florence suggested she calm down and think about it, discuss it with her daughter. And she left, giving her time to think. Brenda was categorically against it. But Tracy... It turned out she had overheard her mother's conversation, and the neighbor's offer greatly interested her. Just think, she persuaded her mother. This way, everyone will be happy. We'll get rid of an extra mouth to feed. Eleanor will get the long-awaited child. We'll be given money that we desperately need right now. To give your own flesh and blood to strangers. Brenda shook her head doubtfully. How can you live with that afterwards? What's so bad about it? Tracy insisted. We're not giving him to an orphanage where orphans have a hard time. He'll live in a rich family. Just imagine, he'll have everything he needs for happiness. And what can we give? He'll cry, just like my younger ones, because he's teased at school for patches. In the end, Tracy convinced her mother. Brenda went to Florence and informed her that they agreed. A few weeks later, Tracy went into labor, right at home, almost a month early. That's why the young woman didn't manage to go to the hospital in advance. Everything happened rapidly. Brenda had to deliver the baby. Thankfully, she had given birth to 5 herself and had a rough idea of what was what. And then everyone was in for a surprise. Twins were born, 2 girls at once. Florence, upon hearing the news, was delighted. Even better then, she smiled, looking at the 2 crying babies. There will be 2 children in the family at once. But it soon turned out that one of the girls was not healthy. Eleanor and Robert came to pick up the children together with a doctor. He examined the babies and delivered his verdict. One infant is wonderful, no abnormalities. But the second, the doctor picked up tiny Maria. This girl has big problems. Most likely she will never be able to move. Everything points to damage to the central nervous system, consequences of premature birth and possibly oxygen deprivation during pregnancy. This happens when the mother leads an unhealthy lifestyle. Tracy lowered her eyes to the floor, and she, of all people, knew perfectly well what kind of lifestyle she led. Robert and Eleanor refused to take the sick girl. They were upset, of course. Eleanor even cried. The couple had already planned to become parents of 2 at once. They had even prepared a room for the twins. But raising a disabled child, they were not ready for that. So Maria stayed in her birth family. Sarah went to the city. Grandma Brenda said that at first they wanted to give me to an orphanage, Maria recalled. They had even processed the documents. Tracy also needed to write a refusal. Grandma was afraid, didn't think she could handle such a difficult child. There wasn't enough money for healthy ones, and a disabled child needed medicine and rehabilitation. Tracy was only too happy to give her up. She didn't need a healthy daughter. And then this. The doctors to whom little Maria was shown, without exception, gave unfavorable prognoses. Examination results showed that Maria would most likely be a vegetable, who wouldn't walk, talk, or understand much. Brenda cried at night. It was hard for her to bear the thought that her granddaughter was born like this, her own flesh and blood after all. Doctors persuaded her to place the girl in a boarding school for the disabled, explaining that it wouldn't matter to Maria where she was. And Brenda had almost decided. She was swaddling her granddaughter's limp body, getting her ready for the trip, and crying. Suddenly, a sad song about an orphan boy surfaced from somewhere in her memory, and Brenda began to sing it, looking at the defenseless baby who would soon be among strangers. The woman's heart was breaking with pity, but there was no way out. And suddenly, Maria looked directly into Brenda's eyes. The melody clearly captivated the child. The baby's gaze focused, filled with meaning. And the girl smiled. This was not a reflex muscle contraction, but a real smile, directed at a loved one. The girl was clearly reacting, and she really liked the song. "Well, you're no vegetable." The grandmother gently picked up the newborn, smiling at her. "I won't give you to anyone." So Maria stayed in the family. The doctors were wrong. The girl's problems turned out not to be so terrible. Tracy did not approve of her mother's action. She had already managed to write a refusal. But Brenda stood her ground. You can't give a child to an orphanage, especially since she understands everything. Her intellect is fine. But in her legs and arms, there was little strength. It's hard for such a child within strange walls. How can you live knowing that your own flesh and blood is suffering somewhere? Tracy just waved her hand, but didn't argue much. A new romance had already begun for her. If her mother wanted a toy for herself, let her bother with it. What did Tracy care? She was being invited to live in the city again. Tracy fluttered into a new life. She again had everything she wanted: money, friends, drinking, admirers. And Brenda raised the younger children and her granddaughter, straining with all her might. But she didn't complain about fate. She made her choice herself. She never regretted the decision. Little Maria filled her heart with tenderness and pity. The girl grew up smart and beautiful. But at the proper time, the baby didn't take her first steps. Her little hands were also weak, but they worked. But her legs, they didn't move at all. 4 years later, it became clear that Maria would never be able to walk. One of the aid foundations raised money for a wheelchair. It pained Brenda to see the child in such a device. The wheelchair seemed to dispel the illusion that Maria was a normal, healthy girl. It officially made her disabled. But Maria herself was happy with the acquisition. After all, now she had the ability to move. Time passed. Maria grew. She even managed to go to school. By that time, the girl had completely mastered the wheelchair. In class, Maria turned out to be one of the best students, and she also made many friends. The children loved their classmate for her kind disposition and cheerful character. It was interesting for them with well-read Maria. She invented so many games. Brenda's children grew up and moved away, and she and Maria were left alone together. They lived in perfect harmony. Sometimes Tracy would also appear. Brenda noted with bitterness that the dissolute lifestyle was affecting both her daughter's appearance and personality. Once young and beautiful, she had turned into an untidy, fading woman with a swollen face and a hoarse voice. Brenda was anxious, afraid that such a life would not lead her to anything good. And so it happened. When Maria was in 6th grade, a tragedy occurred. In the apartment where Tracy was living with her latest suitor at the time, a fire broke out. One of the guests fell asleep with a cigarette. All the drinking companions perished in the fire. Judging by appearances, they were in such a state that they didn't even notice the fire. Brenda later read in the report that none of these people attempted to save themselves. This was a heavy blow for Maria. Yes, she and Tracy were never close, but the girl knew she had a mother, loved her, and hoped that Tracy would sooner or later straighten up. And now there was nothing to hope for. Brenda and Maria grieved for a long time over what had happened. But time passed, and both had to pull themselves together. And then, a new blow. Brenda started noticing that she got tired quickly. She lost her appetite. The woman lost weight. Neighbors and Maria literally forced her to see a doctor. Brenda waved it off, said she was overtired, nothing hurt. But then she yielded to persuasion, especially since her own condition was worrying. It turned out oncology, like a bolt from the blue. Brenda was not scared for herself, but for her granddaughter. She was still a child, a defenseless teenager. Brenda couldn't leave her. The doctor's prognoses were bleak, a maximum of 1 or 2 years. But Brenda surprised everyone. She held on until her granddaughter's 18th birthday. The woman received treatment, followed recommendations, prayed. Maria, after all, had no one but her. Maria helped her grandmother as much as she could. She learned to do everything around the house. She knew which pills to take when. Grandmother and granddaughter held on to each other, cared for each other, and talked a lot. During this difficult period, Brenda told her granddaughter everything. She thought the girl should know the truth. She didn't want to take the secrets to the grave. Learning that I had a twin sister, I was very happy and understood a lot, Maria said, looking into Sarah's eyes. You might think I'm crazy right now, but since early childhood, a friend, my exact copy, would come to me in my dreams. At first she was a girl, but as I grew, she grew. When Grandma told me about my sister, I realized that it was most likely her. After all, there's a connection between twins. Perhaps in our case it manifested exactly like this, in these dreams. Sarah looked at her sister seriously. In those dreams, you were without a wheelchair and could walk, right? Yes, Maria nodded. And you? You mean? Yes, Sarah nodded. I had those dreams too. Now I understand that we were connected all the time. It's amazing, like a miracle. I agree, Maria agreed. Perhaps it can be explained scientifically. Sarah shook her head. It's just that people haven't discovered these communication channels yet. Everything is ahead. I waited for those dreams so much, Maria confessed. I dreamed so much of seeing you again. Me too. Only lately, for some reason, you appeared in my dreams less often. Perhaps the connection weakens over time. But now we don't need that channel anymore. Come visit whenever you want. Maria smiled. Girls, I'm listening to you, and I can't believe this is true. Michael looked stunned. And your meeting? And now the dreams too. Anything can happen in life. Maria smiled. Her face shone with happiness. The sisters held hands. So, at 18, you were completely alone? Sarah clarified. I can't imagine that. At that age, I was a child, lived with my parents, studied at university. And you, it turns out, were already managing on your own? I had to. Maria nodded. Of course, neighbours helped. Sometimes uncles and aunts came. But overall, yes, independent life began. It's okay. I managed. Grandma worried about me for nothing. She thought I would be lost without her. She was very worried. That's why she once tracked down your parents in the city. She told me later, several years later, knowing she didn't have long left. Brenda was very worried about her granddaughter. Maria couldn't walk, couldn't work. At least she learned to take care of herself. The payments were tiny, no relatives nearby. The world is cruel. The girl will be lost. And so one day, Brenda decided on a desperate step. She tracked down Eleanor and Robert. The woman reasoned logically. The couple was raising Maria's sister, not just a sister, but a twin. Perhaps they would be moved, take pity, take her into their family. Then, many years ago, the doctor said that Maria would be severely disabled. Eleanor and Robert were scared. They didn't take the sick child. But in reality, everything wasn't so terrible. Little Maria only had trouble with her legs. Brenda knew that in the city, such children lived full lives. Maybe Maria could still be helped. Florence was no longer alive, but Brenda got Robert's work address from one of the neighbours, and one morning, saying she was going to the hospital, she went straight to him. Grandma didn't tell me the details of the conversation, Maria recalled. She only said that nothing came of it. Robert and Eleanor categorically refused even to meet me, and then they moved to Moscow altogether. You can understand them, of course. They would have had to not just take in a disabled girl, but also reveal the truth to you. My parents told me a completely different story, Sarah said. Apparently, they were demanded money for their silence. They were threatened that they would tell me who I was. That's very unlike Grandma Brenda. Maria shook her head. But I can assume she was desperate, and that's why she talked like that. She desperately needed to secure my future. Maybe she went too far. It's a shame that mother and father were scared then. Sarah frowned slightly. They are very kind and caring. And probably they were afraid of my reaction. They protected me. Because of this, we lost so much time with you. Now we'll make up for it. Maria smiled. You will come to visit me, won't you? We will communicate in reality now, not just in dreams. In connection with this, I have an idea, Michael intervened. Maria, have you ever thought about moving to the city? No, the woman replied. Where would I live there? Let's say there's housing. Would you move? There is housing, Sarah echoed. Michael, you mean? Yes, my grandmother's apartment, Michael explained. She can no longer live alone, and she doesn't want to move in with my parents. She needs someone to give her medicine, cook for her. We just can't find a caregiver. She doesn't like anyone. She says they're strangers. She's afraid of them. And you are as much one of us as can be. What do you think? Can you manage? We'll pay a salary. A good one. Agree, Sarah persuaded. Michael's grandmother lives in the next building. She's very sweet, and you'll get along. And she definitely won't be afraid of you when she finds out you're my twin sister. What is there to think about? Nothing holds me here. Of course I agree. Super, Michael smiled. Sarah hugged her sister without a word. It was a warm August evening. An amazing company was moving along the wide street, attracting attention. Two completely identical young, beautiful women in stylish sky blue sundresses, one of them in a wheelchair, and two identical little girls in bright dresses. The little ones were animatedly chatting with both women. The little sisters had ice cream in their hands. And I always wondered where I got twins. Sarah chuckled. It turns out I'm a twin myself. I look at my beloved nieces and think that you and I could have been so happy in childhood, Maria said. I missed you very much. And I missed you. But the main thing is, now everything is good. Everything really was good now.